Good evening and welcome to our tri-board meeting with the school committee and the finance committee and the board of select. It is 7 p.m. and this meeting is now open. And we thank you all for listening and hopefully learning a lot about each of the three committees and what we do for our town. And what we're going to do is go around the table and introduce ourselves and a sentence or two of what you expect to get out of this meeting tonight. And then we'll have the chairs of each committee tell you what they think their roles are for their committee. So we'll start with Mrs. Raffi.
Hi, Stacy Raffi, School Committee.
And
Sorry. So this evening, this is an opportunity, in my opinion, for the three boards to get together and have a frank conversation about our roles, how we work together, how we collaborate, in particular because we're in the middle of budget season and sometimes there are misunderstandings, miscommunications, misinterpretations of what roles are, et cetera. So my hope for everyone is to have a frank conversation and begin a conversation that will move us forward in the coming years.
I'm Ken Shada. I'm the chairman of the Finance Committee. In terms of what I want out of this meeting, it's to be done by 8 actually, because I have to leave at 8. But I told you that before we started. So but that's right. Really, from my perspective, I look at it more from the information gathering standpoint. The Finance Committee has a very strictly defined role, so I think that with regards to our activities, we know what we have to do. We know what our requirement, what our statutory obligations are, as do all three boards. And so I think that it's good to have these meetings to discuss that, but I think at the end of the day, the law tells us exactly what each of our boards has to do. So.
I'm Tina Hine. I am the clerk of the Select Board. So for me, this is about an opportunity just to share the same space with the very important members of the other two committees that I feel I serve alongside with in terms of making decisions, best decisions for the town. I believe that it's best practice to have periodic, frequent discussions among the three. I believe that doing that guides decisions that we then go off to make individually as we sit on our own boards and committees. And so I welcome and really appreciate the opportunity to share this space and to open this dialogue.
Dan Alford, FinCom member, and I'm looking for world peace.
You're not running for,
Oh, sorry. No, just open the dialogue. So that's.
Tim Maxwell, primarily interested in learning how we can all work better together so that it is not as contentious as it has been in the past.
World peace.
World peace. Yeah.
Holliston Peace. I'm Joan Shaughnessy. I'm on the school committee. I agree with Dr. Shada when he said that the statute tells us what our roles and responsibilities are, and how we interpret those rules is, I think, the topic of discussion tonight. And I think that it would behoove all of us to put some process and procedure around how we work together. I'm a big process and procedure believer, and I think that that takes out a lot of the controversy and any chaos that can be sown. So that's what let's just solve that tonight.
Vince Barrell, I'm vice chair of the Finance Committee. I'm looking just for this to be sort of the start of dialogue between the boards. I think that I'd like to see us having these kinds of conversations, not too often because we all have our own business to take care of, but I think it's important that we have discussions and make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to what everyone's thinking and where everyone's currently at with particular issues. And I think this is a good opportunity to start that dialogue together.
I'm Ann Louise Hanstead. I'm the vice chair of the school committee, and gosh, I came into this meeting kind of with maybe a slightly different perspective. I feel like I understand our roles and responsibilities, probably because, as you and Dr. Shada said, I think they're pretty well defined by the state. But I think more importantly, I have found working with everybody at this table not a difficult challenge. It's not the individuals or the opinions. It's really, by definition, there's checks and balances built into the system. And as such, I think that creates some natural sort of, pause and review when everyone's presenting their priorities, and that's just the nature of the beast. Having said that, I think if we could convene more often, there'd be an opportunity for us to develop a deeper understanding of each other's priorities. And when you have that, it makes it easier to find compromise. And I think that's what this is about, is just trying to understand better where the town's priorities are, and then we're trying to coalesce around a common vision of how to get there. So that's what I'm hopeful for, and I'm pretty optimistic we can do that, so.
Great. I'm going to go back to you. We're introducing ourselves, and then a sentence or two of what you hope to get out of the meeting.
Okay, Lisa Koshin, member of the school committee, and I would probably echo what Ann Louise said. I mean, I think that it's good for us all to get together every once in a while and understand where everyone else is coming from, since there's some overlap in what we care about. So thanks for organizing.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Listevnik. I'm a member of the school committee. Echoing the same sentiments of my colleagues and everyone else around the table, that I think that we all work for the same municipality, we all work for the community, and I think it behooves us to come together to actually have some compromise with each other when we can. And like Anne-Louise said, there's checks and balances, and I don't think we need to figure out I think we know what our roles are. I think it's more just trying to make sure that we're all on the same page, like Ben had spoken about.
Yeah, the only reason why I'm asking for the chairs to explain what the roles are is for the people back home
For the
listening. Yeah,
community.
yeah, so,
Always.
not always just for us.
No, got it. We do that all the time, too.
I'm passing to,
Well, you should introduce
I
yourself.
will, I was going to do it at the end.
Okay.
My name is Jeff Ritter. I'm the town administrator. I'm particularly interested in looking at ways that we can enhance and open lines of communication between the three boards.
John.
I'm John Cronin, Selectman. I share everybody's remarks. I was particularly linked to Ann Louise's remarks. I would echo them word for word. So, IBID.
And I'm Mark Aronian, Chair of the Board of Select, and I want to thank Stacy Raffi for putting the energy into getting this meeting to happen. It takes a lot to get three boards together, and especially during budget season, and everybody's very busy. And I know that we tried several weeks ago, and we had some conflicts, and so I'm glad tonight worked out. But I want to thank Stacy, because she's got to be one of the most caring people in town, and really cares a lot about this community. So I would hope that this is, Stacy's planted the seed, and my hope is that we will have more of these meetings, and we can talk as chairs about, whether it's a quarterly thing we do or whatever folks think is best. But I do think that sometimes communication is lost between us somewhere along the way, and there can be misunderstandings. And communication in a municipal government is really, really important. It's really kind of like one of the most important things we can do is communicate with open public meetings to the residents, and also have discussions with all of us, to try to bring to bring important subjects to light and discuss them with our positions that we have. So again, thank you, Stacy, and if you can just briefly tell the folks back home what you think the role is of the school committee for the town.
Before I do that, can we have Sam introduce
Oh,
himself?
sure,
please?
Sam.
Sorry.
Well, I'm only here because there was a feeling that there needed to be a moderator for three boards coming together. And Bill Mayer was the logical choice, but at the last minute he had a conflict, so I got recruited. And I know many of you, but not all of you, so just as really quickly, at one time served on the Finance Committee. I've chaired 2 government study committees. I have actually chaired a school administrative study many years ago, and for the first 11 years of the Community Preservation Act, I was the chair. So I've had a long history of involvement in Holliston, and I served as the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau for 36 years and have stepped down, so now that I have more time, it's one of the reasons I'm here, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as Mark said, I think the first order of business is for the chairs or the designees, if they would prefer.
And we'll just get you to introduce
right.
yourself.
Yeah.
Dawn Naborski with School Committee.
Great.
Go with the chairs of the 3 committees, just to talk about in general the role that you all play, as Mark said, more for public consumption.
Okay, so the school committee has 3 purviews. We hire and evaluate the superintendent. We work with the administration to create a budget that we bring forth to town meeting for a vote. And policy, we create policy. So those are the 3 high-level purviews of the school committee.
Great. Okay.
Well, you also negotiate a pretty important contract or a couple
Yes,
of important
well, I
contracts.
guess I throw that under the budget, but yes, that is part of it. Sam, if I explained everything that we did, Ken would be leaving, so. Just trying to be
Give us a purview on policy. What is that?
Yes, as what the Finance Committee's role is very succinctly defined in the statutes as advise and consent. It's really more advise than consent. But essentially, for anybody who doesn't know what our role is, it's really to be the financial oversight board for the town. We have an obligation to make recommendations to the town concerning all financial matters. Obviously, town meeting is what ultimately decides, the body of town meeting and the process of town meeting decides how we spend our money. But our role is to basically advise the town on what we think those expenses, what the town should support and what the town should not support. So from our perspective, we don't get into philosophical discussions as much as we get into strictly financial discussions. Everything with us is always about the money. So.
But it is really an advisory committee making recommendations.
Yes.
To town meeting.
Yes.
Great. And the Board of Select is the executive branch of the town, and we try to have as much communication with every single department head, as well as every board in town. So we are very busy people, and we divvy up the liaisons to all of these boards and committees. And so the 3 of us are liaisons to certain departments and other boards to try to keep constant communication. And even with that, it is very difficult to maintain the appropriate amount of communication. So I think this meeting should help with that. The other thing we do is we create committees to do work for our town, which is a very important part of our job, is to recognize problems and issues for the town and make sure that we're getting volunteers that are professionals in that field to try to help the town and make recommendations to point us in the right direction. One of the examples of that is our septic system at Town Hall that was not replaced when this building was remodeled, and now it is a problem. And we've had to create a committee to solve that issue. And in the meantime, we have lack of revenue from our event business upstairs because of the amount of affluent that came out and a jogger stepped in it, and that's not a good thing for our town. And it's certainly not a good example for our town with having that situation. So we create committees to try to solve problems or issues for the town, and it usually ends up costing money. which is, it is what it is, right? We also create policies for the town, and we have a town warrant with articles that we recommend to the town, as well as the Finance Committee makes recommendations for those articles in the warrant. And we try to give as much information as we can at town meeting for the residents so that they understand the things that we're recommending. And that can be very lengthy as well. And it's difficult for people in today's day and age. You think by having it on the town's website or discussing it at your Board of Select meeting or discussing it with other department heads, you think the word is getting out, but it doesn't always get out. And so there can be miscommunication at town meeting. There can be misunderstandings at town meeting. And you have to just get yourself mentally prepared that it's not a perfect world. And your interpretation might be different than someone else's. So that's basically what we do, is we are the executive board of the town. And we do have the role of being in charge of our town administrator, for instance, who is in charge of many people in this building, as well as department heads. And so we're his boss. No one else in the town has the role of being his boss and shouldn't be telling him what to do or disciplining him in any way. That is our role. We're in charge of our town administrator. So that's the sort of level of what we do. And anything I forgot, please chime in. And
You said executive board, that's what I was going to say.
okay. And that's
Mark,
it.
I think it's important for the people at home to understand that the select board is the executive board of the town, but it does not have the purview of the school budget.
No.
And I think that isn't, just if we're going from 30,000 feet down, I think that's an important thing to understand. Because
Absolutely.
the school department is 57% of the omnibus budget, and that doesn't include the benefits of our employees. So
Right.
I've never done that math, I'm
Right.
sure you know it. But that's just sort of an important thing to understand, which is why we have to constantly collaborate.
Right. And the school committee is an elected board, so is the finance committee. And we do not have the authority to tell you what to do with the schools or the school grounds. We do have a liaison, and we do want to help when we can. And we have a lot of collaboration going on. As you know, our town treasurer does all the payroll for the school committee and all the folks that work for the town. And we,
She does the benefits. She just
the benefits, right,
yeah.
right.
Sorry, I just
The
didn't
payroll
write it.
benefits. Sorry, that's what I.
Because that's under the
Exactly
purview
an
of,
issue.
that's under the purview
Yeah,
of
we're
the
like-
town.
That's actually a problem.
Yeah. No, that's, lately, we've been talking a lot about benefits.
Well, I don't
so-
want her
Yes,
to
yes.
come to you asking for a big raise, because you just shared that.
Yeah. And we know that the highway department helps out the schools and does the lawn mowing and the clearing of sidewalks and parking lot. And we have an employee on the DPW department that also does things in-house for municipal buildings, and we share that pay. And the Parks Department benefits from this employee as well. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes on. The tree warden position helps out the schools too, with work like that needs to be done. So, that is the sort of thing that we should be doing as a community.
Treasurer's officers.
What's that?
There's a lot of interconnectivity.
Yeah, there is.
All of those
Yeah, there is.
resources report up to the board, the select board.
Right.
And we have, the school buildings and the teachers and.
Right.
and- yeah, yeah, yeah.
They spend all the money. We have all the-
And we try to make us
But
not
the
spend the money.
the school committee has control over the school budget up to the net school spending. If you go beyond that, then the select board or town meeting actually could reduce it if they chose
Sure,
to.
sure.
Okay, that's important to know as well.
Absolutely.
Can we just introduce? Andy.
Oh, can you introduce yourself?
Sure.
And
Sorry I'm late.
A couple of sentences of what do you hope to get out of the meeting?
Well, I was told there'd be dinner. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, I apologize for being late. Andy Morton. I think it would be just terrific for us to, again, have these kind of open communication where we all see each other's point of view and what we're doing, and I think that's what I walked into the middle of. So I apologize for being late.
All right. And so now we have a brainstorming about, processes,
You're going to be the moderator now?
and now we need the moderator to handle that.
But just to continue what Mark had said, we have an agenda that has an item, at least the first item for discussion, which is what is working well with our process and communication protocols regarding the budget process and what needs improvement. So in terms of having a good conversation, I think it's going to be important that when anybody is speaking, they should be allowed to speak and continue and not be interrupted. So I think my preference would be if you want to say something while somebody's speaking, just raise your hand. We'll come to you when that person is done. But there should not be any interrupting. Ken?
Well, the first thing I'd say, given that the word budget was mentioned in that, we're talking about the budget, is I think that one of the things that I would like to stress about the process is, obviously, every board, every department, anybody who wants to spend money has to come to the Finance Committee in the spring and the winter, as the case may be, to present their budget and also to discuss any financial matters they want to have a recommendation for town meeting. I've always felt that one of the most important things, and people have heard me say this the last several town meetings, it's very important to understand that the Finance Committee has zero support staff. Okay? The Select Board has the town administrator and has access to town employees. So do we, but we don't control them. They don't work for us in any way, shape, or form. Because of that, right, what that does is it places a burden on people wanting a recommendation to come to us. Okay? One of the things that I think has not been working well, that was working well in the past, is when financial matters are raised to any other board in town, or to the town administrator, or to anybody in town, a town employee, the first response should always be, have you scheduled time to talk about this with the Finance Committee, right? There have been several instances over the last few years where financial matters come to us via the warrant, because we see a draft of the warrant, we're told to make recommendations, but that doesn't come with any information about the articles themselves. Who the sponsor of the article may not talk to me or any of the other members of the committee. Doesn't really apply as much to everybody sitting at this table, but I think it's an important point to reiterate that our role, as I said earlier, is to make recommendations. To that end, we're not going to make recommendations unless we have enough material and data to make an informed recommendation. So I think it's very important that that kind of philosophy of it's not a matter of we just put something on the warrant if it's the Select Board or the school committee just asks for it, that they make sure they come to us to say, we need to get on your agenda. I know that throughout the years I've worked with almost everybody at this table and on numerous issues, never been a problem, right? But I do think that in recent years we've run into several instances where the assumption was that because the Finance Committee was given a warrant, or because somebody came to me and said, hey, we're going to have this on the warrant, that then eliminated their obligation to formally say, we need to have this reviewed, right? And that's one thing I wanted to reiterate, is that I'm always willing to put things on the agenda if someone comes to me and says, we are ready to present. And I'll give you an example. This is not an example of where it's not working. This is actually, what I'm talking about is something going on right now. The Select Board's budget was scheduled for review several weeks ago by the Finance Committee. It was not ready yet. And due to several things, the website being down recently, things like that, we had to shuffle our reviews around. And as Mr. Sparrow pointed out to me, he said, the Select Board isn't on there. We haven't reviewed the Select Board yet. And I said, that's because when they missed their slot, we were told they weren't ready yet. So they know they have to get their budget reviewed. So we communicated back to them that, remember, that when you are ready, you have to let us know. I'm not going to put you on the agenda till you're ready. And that I think has been, when people talk about communications problems, in prior years, that's never been an issue. I think that's been more of an issue recently where there's this assumption that, well, we told Ken this, or we saw Ken on the street, or we talked to Dan, or something like this. That doesn't count. You want to be on the FinCom agenda, you come to me, you send me an email, says we are ready to present, and I say this is the date and time you come in and present, and we go from there. And I think that's important because while the informal channels are nice to be in constant communication, there is this need for us to say when you are ready to come to the full board to seek a recommendation, and you have all the data, talk to me and we'll put you on the agenda.
Stacy?
But that is, I don't know the process as well since I've been away from that, but I guess it's a matter of when does that start for you, for the FinCom? Is it after the town administrator compiles the budget and submits you a complete budget? Or
in that one example,
that?
right, in that one example of the select board, that's when they approve a budget to send to us, right? They hadn't approved a budget. In the general case, right, it's not specific to any time of year. When we, for example, when we've published the guideline document, right, when we've looked at the numbers, we come up with our model, we say, here's what we'd like everybody to build their budgets to, the modeling we'd like them to use. We give them a schedule and say, and that's usually through the town administrator or the select board, they coordinate their reviews because they have to review and approve things before they come to us. So that's all coordinated. So by default, every department will get a slot, right? But then there are other financial matters. For example, we have in the fall, we have a lot of, capital items. We've had study requests. We've had, everybody knows the story of the last few town meetings, right? Another example I will give you is we had a couple of years ago where there was the trash contract, the 5-year request for town meeting approval to do a 5-year contract versus a 3-year contract, right? When we discussed that as finance committee, we had no information. We had no information. It was one of these things where that was just on the warrant. We were like, is anybody going to come to us? We don't know who's responsible for this. So we voted, when we got no information, we had to make a recommendation. We said, we're saying no because we don't have sufficient information to recommend favorable action. Subsequent to that, once we voted no in one of our meetings, then all of a sudden it was like, why did the Finance Committee vote no? I actually saw an email where somebody said, I don't know why the Finance Committee voted no. And in that email was all the information we needed. But no one on the thread had ever bothered to say, we have this warrant article that we need the FinCom's approval for, and we need to forward them this thread that has all the information they're going to need to make a recommendation.
So I just want to make sure I'm hearing what you're asking, because I think it's pretty straightforward. You're asking that if any department is interested in or trying to secure funding above and beyond their budget, or that's already approved, that they schedule time to come before the Finance Committee and present their request or requests as soon as possible.
Yes.
And long before warrant. It's as simple as that.
And this works for reserve fund transfers as well. I mean,
Right.
many times in the
So
past,
that's-
we haven't had.
That seems
Right,
reasonable.
Just to clarify to expound on it, it's not even just about the budgets. The bottom line is people need to think of the Finance Committee in this way.
Right, not just
You need a
budget.
recommendation from us.
Could
So
be-
in order to get that recommendation, you need to schedule time with us. And I will tell you, even with petition articles, so forget about people at this table, right? We've had several petition articles over the years, and that's kind of what I've driven. Anybody that comes to me and says, well, there's a petition article on there, I don't know, 9 times out of 10, I won't even know who the petitioners are. But I always say to Jeff, make sure you tell them if there's any financial implication. If they're looking for a recommendation on the any financial part of this, then they should get in touch with me, get on the agenda.
Get on the agenda as soon as possible
Right.
with adequate information.
Don't
explain the
assume that
request.
because we've seen it in a draft warrant
Got
that
it.
means we have enough information for a recommendation.
That sounds like a check, easy to do.
Yeah.
So that begs the question. I don't spend a lot of time on the town website, but how accessible are you? Like if I went to the town, could I say, schedule a meeting with is there anything on the website that tells a petitioner how to go about doing a warrant? Because you know, nobody is watching right now. Like this many people, Mayor Greendale is watching, but nobody else is. So, but if you, I know, I said she's watching. She's
But is this
watching.
about a warrant, or is this may not be what I think what Ken's saying
But what I'm
is
saying
all our
is,
email
in
addresses are
general,
in general.
does it say anywhere if
I don't
you
know.
want this? Is it spelled out on the website? Because that might be helpful. I find the website extremely frustrating, and not user friendly. But that's subject. And the other part of my question, I have a question, is that if you are, let's say you are conservation, bad example, Parks and Rec, and you want something, you have to go through the select board first, correct?
Correct.
Right.
One of the requirements, if you read our guideline document, which apparently many people don't because they keep violating the things we.
Is it accessible?
Yes, it is.
Does the Parks and Rec need that because they have their own board? Or isn't that just-
They have their own board.
It's an
yes.
example. It's
But-
an example.
No, but they don't go to the select board because they have their own oversight board, right?
Gotcha.
The Parks Commission, right? But in general, from the Finance Committee's point of view, and this is spelled out in our guideline document, with regards to budgets or anything pertaining to individual departments, you always have to have the approval of your oversight board. So in many cases, that's the select board. Other cases, like the parks, it's the Park Commission. That's a standard requirement. The first thing we'll ask anybody that comes in, if, for example, the health director comes in and says, I want money for something, the very first question we'll ask is, has the Board of Health approved this request? If they haven't,
Right.
we don't even consider it because they have an oversight board that's responsible for making the request.
So that's my point. This needs to be sort of, if I can't go to the website and find that, if I'm just Jane Schmo petitioner, I would have no way of knowing. We had somebody last spring, I think. This poor guy wanted a beer license or whatever, the beer guy.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, what are you doing here? So it sort of begs the question, how did he get there?
Well,
Like,
it-
how did he get,
to-
like?
to be honest with you-
You remember that?
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
And we don't do a good enough job, in my opinion, of giving that information of how to navigate it.
now, obviously, the FinCom has nothing to do with the website directly, but I agree with you in the sense that I do not know whether the town's website has a link anywhere it says to submit an article. I mean, I think there is something on there.
I believe it's under the town clerk.
Yeah, I think there is something there about petition articles. I don't know whether that information
We
says.
direct citizens to the town clerk's office.
Yes.
Oh,
Right.
beg your
And
pardon.
I mean, it's a brainstorming session, but do the citizens, do they know about this? Is there information on the website? I guess is homework.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know.
Yeah, but this
I think
is
they're saying
getting
it's-
away from the purpose of this meeting, which is the top three boards of the town coming together and figuring out how they're gonna work together. These are other additional issues that, I don't know if you wanna spend your time dealing with that rather than these issues. Ben, you had a question.
Well, I just wanted to sort of piggyback a little bit on what Ken was saying, is that, he's right, we don't have a staff, we have to do a lot of this ourselves. And I think it's important, too, to remember that, yes, it's important for people to come to the Finance Committee, but Ken's just one person, and there's a liaison process, too. And, I appreciate that, we all kind of have our departments that we're communicating with, and I think it's important to remember that, Ken's not the only one on the board. There's other members, and we all have, I've worked a lot with Sean from the DPW and working with him to try to get some, to help him with his budget and things like that. And that process is there is, it's not all just go to Ken. It's, there are others, and trying to do that. And I think it's also useful. I know I've certainly had conversations with Tina, with John, with Mark, and it's been helpful for me to be able to hear, getting back to this particular meeting here, that there's dialogue between our boards on an individual basis, not just between the chairs. Because I think one of the things that I like to hear from the horse's mouth. I want to know exactly what other people are thinking. So if I have a question for the school board, I won't ask Ken that question. I'm going to call Stacy. I'm going to call Joan. I'm going to call Ann Louise. And I think there needs to be those lines of communication, and those relationships need to be developed as well. So that way, it's not all on the chairs to do that, but it also gives us the opportunity to hear points of view directly.
Tina?
Did you want to respond?
No, good. I just wanted to respond quickly. Just to clarify, right, when I said come to me, I'm talking about scheduling, right? That I want to be perfectly clear about. All scheduling has to come through me, because that's actually something I don't want, and I don't think any of the chairs want, is members of the board making scheduling decisions, right? The
Sure.
chair is ultimately responsible for the agenda,
Sure.
so
But
just
I
to be
think,
clear.
but I
on
just
that.
want to say that
I
there's
agree with
more,
your
the
statement.
information should come.
You're
via
entirely right,
other
but my
channels as
comment
well.
was geared more towards getting on our agenda. You come to me.
Gotcha.
So.
Yep.
So clearly, communication was on the agenda, but when we went around and everyone shared why it is or what they were hoping to get out of tonight, priorities came up often in the comments that were shared. So I just want to come back to the example. It's old enough history that it probably can be talked about without bringing in too many anecdotes or stories, but the comment you made about the trash contract of a few years ago, my question would be is, if it's a priority that's been established by the town, why would that not be enough? So you reference it, and I'm not challenging you, I just want to understand more where communication and where priorities meet on this, because if it's a priority of the town to renegotiate a trash contract, that would seem to me to be sufficient enough, and that would put the onus on whatever the board or committee that it's in front of to kind of do that due diligence, do that work. And I'm not saying it didn't happen, that's what I mean, it's long ago enough that it shouldn't trigger any of those kinds of thoughts. But where do communication and priorities come together, where reaching the priority goals of the community are greater than?
Well, to answer your question, since it's okay to answer, I think that one of the things that's important to understand is, I mentioned that our role is advise, right? Primary advise, right? So you have a 7-member board, and part of our advice is necessarily going to be what each individual member believes is a good value for the town. Okay? We would be abrogating our responsibility if we just said this is determined to be a priority, so we don't look in the details, right? In that matter in particular, right? In that matter in particular, is, since you said we've talked about it now, right? The law stipulates that the town cannot enter into contracts longer than 3 years without town meeting approving that exception, which is what was being sought. From the FinCom's perspective at the time, we were not just going to blanket approve that, given that the town's trash situation was not very good. There was no information available as to why the 5-year contract was needed. For the members, we're looking at it saying, if we're in a bad situation with our trash right now, we don't feel we're getting value for our money, why would we go to the town and say, town, we're okay with you approving a 5-year contract, right? When we got the additional information, just to give you an example, when we got the additional information, which was, when you go to the 5-year contract, you get more bids because the cost of the trash trucks can be amortized over a longer period. Just one example of things like that. Then the committee could look at it and say, okay, this results in a good value for the town.
Well,
if the town decided that, if the executive board of the town or any board in the town decided that they wanted to make an expenditure that the FinCom believed was not in the best interests of the town, then we would voice our opinion. That doesn't mean, and just to be perfectly clear, we make a recommendation. So that is our role. If we don't want to be a board that just says, okay, we blindly approve something because we think that we've all agreed this is a priority for the town. It still has to be a good value.
I guess my one comment on that would be, is town meeting the place to air a grievance on a communication breakdown? If the priority is established by the 3 boards, committees here at the table, is town meeting the place to air that grievance? I ask that sort of to the group, not to the chair in particular, but it seems to me the work to be done is to establish the priorities and to keep the lines of communication open long before we get to town meeting. That's the point I'm trying to make.
That's
simply.
always the objective, right? However, one thing I would say just in response is, and I think that this is a little bit of something that I struggle with sometimes, right? It's okay to disagree at town meeting. I think there's this determination that we have to come in and all be singing the same tune. And yes, we all like that. We all want town meeting to run efficiently. If we're all in agreement, we want it to go through, present our views to the town, have them approve it, and move on. However, there's nothing wrong with us having a disagreement. If the select board says this is something we want to do, and our financial recommendation is this is not in the best interest financially, right? The town can decide what they want to do. That's what we're presenting. We're presenting both sides of the argument. Town meeting can sit there and say, the finance committee is right, this doesn't make sense. town meeting can say, Finance Committee, we appreciate your recommendation, but this is a priority to us, so we're going to go with what the Select Board recommends. And I'm not trying to make it a Select Board versus Finance Committee thing, I'm just using that as an example. And yes, we want to communicate, we want to make sure all the information's out there, because what we don't want to have happen is that you have differing viewpoints going into town meeting because there wasn't enough information exchanged. If you have all the information out there, and with all the communication, there's a difference of opinion, that's all right, that's democracy in action. So,
Dan, I think you had your hand up first.
Look, letting the town know that there are disagreements, I don't think there's any issue with that. Obviously, we don't want it to denigrate to a sort of all-out shouting match. But at the same time, in the ideals of open and transparent government, you know, ensuring that things are sort of opened up and to the public and not buried just because we're disagreeing about something, I think would be doing the citizens of this town a great disservice. So if we go into town meeting and we disagree on something, and there's something going on that you know is someone deems to be something important to be aired, you know, to let the town know. I mean, it's very important. And just because the board of the select board views something as a town priority, if they come to the finance committee, whether we view it as a priority or not, in some at times can even be moot. But if we can let you know there's no money for that, at least the way sort of we see things, and so then maybe you go back and you decide, well, we need to find a different funding source, and so we would need to look at different options of ways of doing that, and then present those to us for sort of, you know, recommendation, and then go to town meeting with those different options. I mean, if everything was just sort of waved through, the budget would be a complete mess, and we would never have any sort of idea of really, you know, what we were spending and how we were spending it. And so, I mean, I'm not entirely sure what the hesitancy of bringing stuff, you know, before us is. I mean, the select board can always put things on the warrant that then get brought to, you know, town meeting for a vote, and we can vote for, you know, the finance committee can vote in favor or against it, and the town can make their own choice once they, you know, as long as they can obviously find the funding for it.
I think we're getting to the heart of some of the consternation among the boards, and this is trash example is a very good one. The select board is the executive board of the town. They did their due diligence. They had a subcommittee, as Mark described. They decided that it is in the best interest of the town that we enter into a 5-year contract. So the question is, for the FinCom, in my view, and correct me if I'm wrong, whether that is a fiscally responsible amount every year. I do not think it is the purview of the FinCom to decide whether a 5-year contract is right over 3, because the executive board has made that decision, because in their view, it is in the best interest of the town. Here's where the collaboration piece comes in, but I think this is the heart of a lot of the acrimony among the boards. Because if the finance committee, we have to describe in great length why we want a math tutor at Miller, for example. And then we get these questions, and it often feels like that's out of purview. How much can you give the schools? And it's our executive board job to decide what we can do with that money. Not pick and choose from a laundry list of things that we say are priorities. So I think at the risk of offending anyone or everyone at this table, I think this is part of the problem. What's in scope and what's out of scope? You're interrupting. You're interrupting.
Nope, this is nope.
yeah.
I have a question, so I'm going to prerogative of the moderator. I mean, I think it's incumbent upon the school committee, it's incumbent upon the select board, if they're making a proposal that's part of their budget, to be able to identify the funding for that. That's not the job of the FinCom to figure out how you're going to spend it, or how they're going to raise the money to fund it. But it is your responsibility to make it a complete package that explains the expenses and the revenues, and then present that to the FinCom, and the FinCom can push back if they choose. But I mean, but you know, the other issue is, what's the trigger that starts the process where the FinCom gets involved? I mean, the school committee has responsibility for creating their budget, whether it's, you know, right at net school spending or above it. making an assumption here, that it's after the committee votes approval of a budget that it then goes to the FinCom. So it's not,
Can I, for clarification? Because
yeah.
there is,
This was
I
more
just
about the
want to
trash
say,
example.
at least with respect to the schools and our operating budget in particular, but also capital, there is a well-defined process. We publish a calendar right up front. We share it with the finance committee. They share their calendar with us. This starts many months in advance of town meetings so that we are working in lockstep to go through the budget process. Suffice it to say, there's never been, in my recollection, a year where we say, hey, we're good, we don't need any money this year.
Yeah.
So
We can start
what
now, we're fine with
triggers,
that.
what triggers the process is the need for something above the current budget, right? And we start that many, many months in advance. And it's a very well-defined process in terms of estimating where we stand today, what our run rate is, and going from there toward evaluating, potential incremental needs. That's a very open process. There's many, many meetings that are publicized, et cetera. I actually think in this regard, this is the only time the schools ever, I think, run into difficulty with the other boards is quite simply that we run consistently above what the guideline is. It's the nature of the beast. We cannot do anything about that. Well, it wouldn't be pretty if we did. Let's just put that. And it's not because we're not running the budgets efficiently. That's not the reason. I won't even go into the reasons, but that's sort of the first thing. I think the second thing is that what Joan's getting to is that because we want to make a compelling case and be very transparent about why we're asking for incremental funding, we go through an exhaustive itemization of what we're looking for funding for, a presentation around each and every item, to the point where several years ago we decided we're not going to go into this exhaustive multi-page PowerPoint document to go through it anymore. But we provide the information. Now, having said that, then there have been moments where, and I know it's not intentional, I know you're all doing your jobs and trying to be, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the town to do this, but it does often feel like, based on comments that have been made here and there, that so-and-so likes this particular position or item, and so-and-so, and another individual on the committee says, well, I don't think you need that person, I think you need this person, or whatever it is. And that is the point at which it can feel like the finance committee may be overstepping. And I have to be honest, I think that's less common. I don't think that's the spirit in which the finance committee approaches their job. I don't think it's the intent. I think it's human nature to start looking at individual positions and have some personal insight about why you think one thing's more important than another. And we've always been able to work through the process. There's been some rough moments here and there, but we've always worked through it. So, if we had to state any place where there's discomfort, it would be there. When it gets into, well, I don't think you need that person, or I don't think you need this. And our point back and when we're asked to prioritize our, what are your most important positions? Well, the intent may be to see how much funding you can provide the schools with. What it feels like on the receiving end is cherry picking. And that's where it can get uncomfortable.
And not just for schools, but the trash
You had
example.
a hand up?
Because to your point, I mean, yes, we're looking at your individual recommendations because you are over guideline. If you were coming in at guideline, we'd want to see what you were doing, but it wouldn't be the same thing. So we're not necessarily comparing all of your things to one another even and prioritizing it. It's prioritizing it. No, it's prioritizing all the different other people that have come in with above guideline budgets as well. So that's why we do need to know that if you were to come in and say 1%, we're there, then we're basically done. Walk away. You can spend that money anyway how you want once the town gives it to you, and you never come in at 1%. So you're asking for additional funding to what we've already sort of told everybody else that we're gonna be able to afford.
John, you had your hand up a couple
So,
times.
yeah, just in response to what Dan's kind of couching here, so am I hearing that you and/or your committee doesn't try to delve into the non-fiscal areas of these requests, that you know your boundaries? Am I hearing that? And in that case, it's the guideline,
We're
or
looking into the different positions, and sure, we're taking views on what we've.
are there boundaries with what you would look at?
It would have a financial impact. Things that have
Department head
financial-
increases last year.
I mean, that's-
Did
that
you
is
and/or
literally
members,
money.
hold on, please let me ask the question. Did you and/or members of your committee make veiled negative remarks about the performances of certain department heads that our committee had already?
No, absolutely not. No, I'm not, I didn't hear in public comment anybody critiquing in fact, it was quite the opposite. Everyone said that we have very hardworking town employees. There was one comment about one individual that said that you gave more than that the requested money was. But as far as, I mean, everyone said that the members of our, of our, town departments do an exceptional job and work very hard, and that this is about other issues, not.
Okay, I actually know that's not true, but I won't challenge you tonight. I'll be happy to show you
Why
the record.
challenge me?
Well, I'll show you the
You
record
just
even better after this. I
I
don't
mean-
want to be contentious about it.
Well, no, I
But
mean, we're
that's
bringing it up in
Joan-
public. Let's not
Hold
bring
on,
this.
hold on.
No, let's keep it open.
It is open. It's going to be open.
Bring it up now.
Joan brought up a touchstone point, which is overreach. And as far as I'm concerned, watching the way the committee works, it doesn't happen a lot. Ann Louise is right, but when it does, it's big. And that was a classic example of overreaching when you folks had many, many opinions about how we performed our job of evaluating department heads for their salary
You say
increases.
the
Hold
select
on.
board spends $100,000.
Let him-
You
let him
folks,
speak. Let him speak.
you folks wanted
Dan,
all the,
Dan,
you
let him
folks
speak.
wanted all the apparatus and all the files and all the data that we did to assess those salaries, because you wanted to second guess us. And emails were created that have content that was disparaging against certain individuals who were department heads. That's classic overreach, and it fed into the bias of the way you guys processed that whole
Right,
problem.
you need to let me respond to this.
I'm done.
And then
Yeah,
can you?
when he's
because-
finished.
Okay,
done.
well, overreach would additionally be the select board going and spending $100,000 when town meeting had appropriated $75,000 for that purpose. So I don't, I mean, if you're gonna start pointing at overreach, let's talk about overreach.
Ask me a question.
Well, you put out a $100,000 worth of salary increases. Yes, you were able to stagger it over 2 years and play some financial method, but you still came in above what the town meeting appropriated
No.
Originally.
That's not true.
It's not true.
Well, that was what was presented to us as what you were doing. So if somehow there were other favorabilities that you got, I mean, then that's just dumb luck.
Ken?
Okay, so I want to say a couple of things here. Beginning, I started initially with what Joan was saying. I think what's important to understand is there's a finite pie. Okay? The dynamic changes when there's a limited pool of funding available. Because at that point, the Finance Committee has an obligation to recommend a balanced budget to town. We cannot spend in deficit. With a finite pool of money, the Finance Committee, by necessity, has to make choices as to what they will recommend to fund. Okay? That doesn't mean that the Finance Committee necessarily imposes its will over the will of the boards. We don't go to any individual board and say, do this because we think that, but when we have a sum total of requests that exceeds the funding capacity of the town, we have an obligation to make it work, okay? With regards to the schools, and I agree with Ann Louise, right? We've had a very good working relationship with the budget subcommittee of the schools for many years. Okay? But I think it's important to understand that, yes, it is the Finance Committee's purview to ask for details about spending requests when it is likely that we cannot fund the entire request. If it were preferential that we said, there's no money for this, zero, we could do that. Instead, what we try to do is work with the boards to identify what their highest priorities are so that we can fund things, or I shouldn't say that, town meeting funds everything, just to be clear. We can make recommendations for a balanced budget that meets the financial resources the town has, okay? That doesn't mean we change priorities. Now, with the trash contract that you pointed out, right? The issue there was, we were trying to understand what the financial value was of going to 5 years.
Sure.
Okay? That was it. We weren't questioning whether they were picking the right provider. We were just saying that from the standpoint of the town, we were in a situation that we felt, that the town, even the select board agreed, was not a good situation. So absent any information, if somebody said to you, I'm in a bad situation, so would your recommendation be to keep this bad situation for potentially more years than the law allows? No, your obvious thing would be, well, why would you request to continue a bad situation longer? It's not that we're sitting there saying, we're questioning your judgment. We're just saying, give us the information. And that's all that happened. When the information was received, with our limited pool of funds, we said, this makes sense to recommend this. This is a good financial value for the town. And it turned out to be a financial value.
But bad situation is a subjective thing.
Correct.
And my point is, and was, and remains, is that is the decision of the executive board. Whether we are going to go with this provider for 3 years or 5 years, is they've made that decision. So they go before the finance committee. So
You're misstating
if you
the situation.
If you disagree, then this is a huge part of contention. And I think another layer of this is that when we talked about the roles of the finance committee, I want to understand a little more. Is it the purview of the select board, ergo the town administrator, ergo the select board, or the FinCom to decide on what the fiscal health of the overall town looks like? For example, if we want X bond rating, is that up to the select board, or is that up to the finance committee? And I think that remains another issue of whose purview is that?
No, we have a joint policy document that we review every 2 years, right? That's both boards agreeing to that, right? Okay, so that's set in paper. That's a non-issue. The other part of this that I would say is, you're talking about the issue with the contract being 3 versus 5.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, go back to what I was saying earlier. There's a finite pool of money, right? So the town we have an obligation to present, to dole out those funds or make recommendations for doling out those funds to meet a balanced budget.
But 3 or 5 years doesn't, you're missing what I'm saying, I think. If they're going to have us in a bad situation or a good situation, whether they choose for 3 or 5 years, it is not up to you to decide if that is a bad situation or a good situation.
You're correct. It's town meeting's decision. But town meeting elected the 7 of us to decide if it made financial sense to the town.
That is my point.
Okay.
Financial sense to the town.
Yes.
Whether a 3 or 5 year contract is up to the select board, it is not up to the finance.
No, it does have a financial impact to the town because, for example, the reason that we ended up supporting the 5-year contract was because when presented with the data on what that does to the trash contract, which is a financial matter, right, it was clear that it was a better value to go with the 5 years. That was our question. Our question wasn't 3 versus 5, it was what is the financial impact of going to 5 versus 3?
Not what I heard you say a couple minutes
All
ago.
right, we can't keep getting bogged down. You guys have
Right.
been talking about this, and you can talk about it afterwards.
But I do think
But
the
this
point
is
I
the
want,
heart of the
and I have to leave in a minute anyway, but the point I wanted to make was there's a limited pool of funds, and that drives everything, right? So by necessity, the FinCom has to make judgments independent of the requests on what we are going to recommend to the town. We obviously try to follow the priorities set by the individual boards, which is why we ask you to give us those priorities, right? But in the end, when we can't fund everything, I think this problem goes away if we had an infinite pool of money. Then we would say the school committee comes in and says, we need this, we say, okay, fine.
Those are points you've made, but we've got,
So,
you know,
anyway, I
three
have
other
to
people that
leave
need to
anyway, so
talk.
my board will have to take over for me.
So Tina, and then Ben, and then Stacy.
What?
I think I might have cut someone off there.
No.
All right. So before you go,
Okay.
I know you have not approved any major recommendations on any
Correct.
budgets, but you've certainly heard a fair number. Where do we stand today with the budgets that you've heard against the projected revenues?
We're over. We always are. And we haven't even gotten their number yet.
Can you give me some
Oh,
specifics so that?
We've seen their number. Well, I haven't seen their number, but.
Wait,
Well, I don't want
take
to.
issue on something that's.
Well, so excuse me, 1 second. All
Okay.
hold on.
We haven't
Yes.
voted on it.
Yeah, come on.
1 minute,
Okay.
please.
Tina,
All I
finish.
asked was for the budgets you've heard so far,
Okay.
where do we stand against projected revenues that you used to set up your guidelines going into the budget season? Where
Well,
do we stand with
we-
what you've heard so far?
The requests are exceeding what we had planned.
Do you track how much at this point?
Yes, I do track it, but to be honest with you, it's not particularly relevant until we start talking about the schools, because they're such a big chunk of the budget. So, but when we start the process, right, we do a model of what we expect to see when the state starts doing, the biggest factor here is state aid, right? We come up with a model, and that spreadsheet is available for anybody who wants to see it, right? It's not like a big hidden secret. The guideline is calculated based on those estimates at that time, applied to all budgets.
Let me just back up for 1 second to clarify my question. We are going to go through the warrant review, and there will be spending articles that are outside of the budgets that have been presented so far and will be presented. And this would be a good point to communicate back to the select board as we go into the review of the articles, what we should be thinking about. I would say the same probably for the CBAs, but that's communication we need back from the Finance Committee, so that when we get to a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, out from the final warrant, we're not in a situation where the wheels are off the bus and there's a lot of frustration. So if you can give me, or your committee can give me, a time or a place or a moment by which I can understand that information, that would be helpful for me in my job on the select board to start reviewing some of those spending articles.
Right.
Surplus or deficit before even adding in the schools request.
Well, that's why I said it's tough, because the schools will
But
put us
there's
formally
a
into.
line in the budget for
Yeah.
warrant articles.
There is some money.
We
we put
included
aside
some money for
articles.
warrant
Yeah.
articles. I can talk
But
about
that gets back to what I said earlier,
We
right?
can talk about the specifics later, but that is my
Right,
question.
but that gets back to what I was saying earlier, right? I'm generally very available. Most of the committee is generally very, very, very available. It just takes a request, right? You said to me, you want to send, how many times have I met you at Coffee Haven when you said, let's talk about this, and we set up a time and we go talk about it. So
Once.
that's, but I'm just saying to ask Mark how many times, or John, John calls me, I talk to him frequently, right? The reality is that when we set the guideline, that is based on our expectations at the time of what will result in a balanced budget. That's literally what drives our conversation. We don't sit there and say we're going to stash slush funds. We say, what can we afford to let the departments do that results in a balanced budget? And because that pie is typically less than the requests,
Yes.
that forces us into these kinds of decisions of, okay, let's talk about, sometimes people get offended that we ask for prioritization, right? But the reason we ask for that is because, to Joan's point and to Ann Louise's point, we prefer that you do it, not us, right? We're not the school board. We don't want to say, okay, here's the menu. Now, if that happens, then that is our fault, right? If we're making those choices. But the reason we ask for the priority is because when there's a limited pool, we have to know, if we have a finite amount of dollars, what is most important to you, meaning whatever budget we're talking about, what is the most important thing?
Honestly, I'll have to go back and review notes from the special town meeting, but I believe our board did prioritize, and I believe that went as far as our board prioritizing and no further.
All right,
Yes,
But I think
you
that-
prioritized, but there was no communication about the financial details, no discussion with us about those
Okay.
things. That was a bigger issue, but that's what we take
I
offline.
don't know if yours is
But
still
I do have to go.
related, but.
It is actually, because I think one of the things that I'd like to see change from the finance, being on the finance committee, is I don't like being on a committee where we always have to have people come to us. I want to create some sort of a mechanism. I think Tina asked, yes, that's a great question about what are we working with for warrant articles? Because I think I want to be a good partner, and I want to be able to share the right information with the right people. But I don't often know what's the right thing to share. So you telling me that, I think, is very helpful, because I think I don't like that point of view and being in a position where everyone has to come to me or come to our board. I want to be able to reach out and to know what to reach out and to be able to be proactive in that sense. But I don't always know what that mechanism or what that information that would be prudent and possible to share. Short of when I'm, the example, like I said, I've been working with departments about their budget. We're talking to them, what can we do? What are your priorities? What's important to you, and working with them particularly. So I just, I think that's something that I would want to people to take away from this too is what can we do better to share if it's something that's prudent and salient to those particular moments, and if it's, hey, you know, this is kind of the pool of money that we have to work with, and these are the kinds of things so that are on the warrant, we need to start making choices if it's, you know, whatever that number is. If we have $100 and this one particular article is going to cost $95, well, that doesn't leave a lot of room for other options. And then the second thing I had is just a question, actually, and it's right now, I believe town meeting eliminated a personnel board and made the select board the personnel board.
Right.
So I guess my question for that is, you know, it's kind of related a little bit to the raises and things like that. Is what is the purview of that personnel board to be able to make those choices? It's more, I'm making I want information. I don't really understand, and I want to make sure that, you know, you have the latitude to be able to make personnel decisions if it's somebody deserves a raise or not, aside from the other stuff, the other pieces in the communicate, whatever was happening. But being able to define that, I think, would be helpful, because I think, you know, it is a new role for the select board that used to be taken on by a different board. So I just asked the select board, what does that look like? What should it look like? And how does the finance committee, or should the finance committee, have input in that process?
Stacy, you had your hand up a while ago.
If they want to answer that, that's fine, because I can,
Okay.
it's not related, so I'm happy to sit back for a second.
It's not an easy answer,
Okay.
because I don't think I can point to a policy that defines exactly what we do and how we do it.
Okay.
The personnel board was a, if it ever was a thing, was long gone and hard to find by the time we eliminated it. It was a dysfunctional arrangement because it relied on professional volunteers that never filled the void. So inevitably, the town administrator took on that role by default, and so the select board felt the need to get rid of the personnel board as a thing that didn't exist, and we just kept the practice going. So it's become that, but there is no policy that defines exactly what the rules are that we should be following.
And we did, just to follow up on that answer, talk with town council about it, and they had recommended to do away with it because most towns have. So that's how that happened.
Yeah, I just have a point of order, Sam. If I leave and the FinCom falls below quorum, does FinCom have to vote to adjourn? Because I have to go and we're going to be below, only 3 people.
I don't know.
Well, we can't vote to adjourn without a quorum.
I mean, it's not like
No, I
there's
know,
gonna
but
be
I'm
a
saying we
vote
could
at
vote
this
to adjourn,
meeting.
but
This is
can
board
we
We're
of
not
adjourn our?
voting, though, on
We're not
anything,
voting,
so
no.
there's
But
no
there-
voting.
There are 3 separately posted meetings that occur.
Right, that's,
So
I'm
we
just,
should be able to adjourn the finance committee meeting.
that's what I'm saying. If we, can we adjourn the finance committee meeting?
Go right ahead.
So,
I don't see. Do you want to do
Okay. What?
Second.
okay, that's okay. So it's not subject to debate, so you vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none, 0 abstentions, okay. We're adjourned. But you're not.
This meeting is not adjourned.
No, the
This meeting's not adjourned.
Meeting's not adjourned.
Finance committee is adjourned. So,
Stacy,
Ben,
Yes.
you took the words out of my mouth, so
Thank you, Ken.
thank you, because that was sort of, I'm sitting here listening, and I agree wholeheartedly with you. I don't like to feel like we have to come to the board. We're available too. You're available. Everyone's available, so I don't like that. It is in how we say things sometimes that causes little consternation. My frustration on my frustration has always been around, I feel like the 3 boards sort of work in their own silos, and I think even though there is communication between and amongst, it still feels very much like we're in 3 separate silos. We all know that there is a finite pie. I feel like, and this sort of goes to my comments and concerns about, we really need a strategic plan, a roadmap, a vision, a something. We're all sort of going about our own ways, yet I don't think we're consciously taking into consideration the other priorities. So I have said to Mark several times, we need to have a conversation about this, because there's no reason why the school committee couldn't vote to hold off on some request when we know we need to we need something big on this side. Like, we have to work together. We live here, we are neighbors, we are friends. We need more of that type of collaboration. I really do feel like we're in our own silos, and it is frustrating, and sometimes I feel like we're just spinning wheels and we're like little hamsters on the wheel. You know, at what point can we sit down and have a plan?
So this is related to that, and I would echo all your comments, Stacy. There's sort of at a micro level and then a macro level, I think, ways to address this. But at a micro level, just talking about us always feeling like, or any committee feeling like we always have to go to the finance committee. I totally respect that there's a limited amount of time. You guys have nobody else working for you, et cetera, et cetera. And budget season is compressed, and it's hard just to get through all the different budgets that you have to get to. But one of the things that's challenging is that, you know, we have those same problems, and we put in tons of time outside of our regular meetings. There are 2 or 3 select meetings in the school committee schedule that it would really help if at least one of our liaisons could come to and attend, and we of course would always invite the select board as well, because I think it would help inform you. And yet, year after year, when we reach out and invite everybody, sometimes nobody comes. Usually we get 1 or 2, but it's not necessarily our liaisons, or they are. And for operating, you've often been there, I know that.
I try to go when I can.
And I so appreciate that, and yet it doesn't always line up with who our liaison is, and so we don't know, you know, is that how does the dissemination of information get back? This isn't at all on you.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
like we need to know that if the liaison shows up, liaison's taking that information back, sharing it at large, and that it's a two-way conduit for information, and it's our strategic initiatives meeting, probably the meeting at which either the superintendent presents his budget, or you know, when the school committee is then deliberating the subcommittee's recommendation, and before we vote or at our vote. Like, that literally is 3 meetings, and you will often see us attending your meetings in the throughout the year, and you know, typically a couple of us are at select board meetings when there's a critical point of interest. Everybody's busy, but I do wish there was, and if you're not there, then you know, the meetings need to be recorded or live streamed so that people have access to it, because that two-way conduit at a micro level goes a long way toward information sharing and understanding the wheres and why fors on our budget. So that's just the micro level. At a macro level, what Stacy's talking about, we lack a strategic plan for the town, which is fairly stunning, and it's something we've been talking about for years. And I think born out of that conversation was the Economic Development Committee several years ago. I don't know where that stands. We haven't really heard much about that, but I don't think it's just about economic development. Strategic priorities go well beyond the economics of a town. They may go toward meeting the needs of various constituents in a way that's not purely economic. So I would second Stacy in suggesting that we need a committee that sits above the Economic Development Committee that really is tasked with creating a strategic vision. And then related to that, sorry, this is a bit of a preamble, the other piece of the budget process that at a macro level I think is a little bit more broken than, I actually think the operating budget process is clean. It may lead to disagreements at times, but it's the capital. Capital budgeting in this town is still not where it needs to be. Mm-hmm. And we have tried with outside consultants. They came to the table with excellent advice. There was a preliminary model that was very close to being a useful tool, but the key piece that no one could agree on were the different criteria for prioritizing all of the different items in the model. It was supposed to be a model of inputs, not outputs, but there's an easy way to get there. And the reason that criteria couldn't be agreed upon is because we didn't have a strategic plan that tied to it.
To guide us, a guiding principle, right.
So therein lies the problem with capital budgeting, and we can talk about the operating budget all day long, but capital budgeting and going beyond that into debt financing, by order of magnitude, is tens of millions of dollars above and beyond anything our operating budget looks like. So if we can't get our heads around a strategic plan that's going to guide that, that is the single most important issue this town needs to face, and soon. Because if you're, fast pass at the debt schedules for, a handful of major projects is a guidepost, it would suggest that we need to figure this out very, very quickly. So that's just a seconding for you, because I think it ties directly to next steps for the town and what we're doing, and that's a much harder nut to crack. So.
Very well said.
Dan, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so just to respond to that, I mean, certainly attending those meetings would be helpful, obviously.
I know, it's work.
One thing I would say is I've gone to a few of the strategic planning things over the years, not nearly all of them, and come away kind of overwhelmed because it's a wish list of everything that all the principals want, and
Not so much this year.
It's very streamlined now.
Okay, well, the ones that I went to, we came away with 1,000 different things that were wanted, and
respectfully, that's the hard part.
and very few of them came. Right, but very few of them ended up coming all the way down to us, and so I don't want to say it wasn't a waste of time because it was sort of interesting to see all the different things that were being proposed. But as far as our role goes, it was a bit beyond sort of what we needed. So there was pizza. So
it was
nice.
a lot.
Yeah.
Because it is a lot.
And we do try to, we have our liaison meetings and stuff. I do disagree with Ben a little bit as far as going to the other boards, because the finance committee doesn't originate any spending, really, right? We're not proposing new ideas, and we can't possibly know what you guys are trying to do and the monies that you're going to need unless you come to us and say, this is what we're doing. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be every time coming to us. Sometimes an email to the whole committee, which would be most helpful. Just sort of saying, these are the things that we're now discussing. We're trying to figure out what it is, and then once we sort of narrow it down, then it's not every step of the way that we need someone to come in and give us a whole presentation. God, that would be incredibly inefficient. But I mean, we've worked well with the schools over the year because because we know that the schools are going to come in with some absorbent and ask, and then we're going to try to whittle out a way that we can fund what we can within the confines of everything else. But I mean, it's we need to be part of the decision. But again, we're not sort of driving them. But I do want to say one thing, because I'm very good at criticizing people for when I think that they've done something that is not helpful. I also want to feel fair the other way, and I try to go out of my way to do that. The debt schedule and stuff that you guys put together, I think I'd like to get a little more information on it, but was one of the things that I was sort of asking for, was some sort of wholesome information about what all these projects cost, and so I appreciate that being put together and presented to us. It's very eye-opening, because it's clearly, to me personally, that and I think most of us would agree, that it's going to be very difficult to fund all of that at any time in the near future. But what I did say, in October, was that coming together, and not a whole tri-board meeting, but some sort of ad hoc working group that does try to come up with some sort of priorities. And I really think that, yes, we're all elected, and in theory we're elected to make decisions for town and then bring it to town meeting for votes for funding and stuff like this. But I really do think it's something of this magnitude. It would be very important to do some sort of work to get the communities involved, and not just a few individuals from the community, but real surveys to say, what does the town want? Does the town want a new high school above everything else? Or is it that they want new sidewalks, a DPW facility, a new library, where really are, because that will, I think, guide a lot of the decision making going forward. Every group has their own, except for the finance committee, but has their sort of their projects that they want, and a lot of them are quite big. And since we know we can't fund them all, I think that it is not just, who gets to take it to the voters first through, the debt exclusion override. That should not be the group that wins just because for whatever reason their thing lines up quicker than others. So I think this is a good first step in it, but I would like to see some, again, some sort of working group on vision, a vision, committee of some sort.
Yeah.
Actually, Ben had his hand up first, so.
So I have 2 points, and just to respond to Dan, you're right. There is certainly, we can't go to everybody all the time. We don't always know when there's important financial matters. But I think the thing to keep in mind that we need to keep in mind. I mean, people at this table, the boards are bigger, they have bigger budgets, but some of the smaller budgets, some of the smaller departments and such, they don't know who we are. They don't have relationship with us, and the only times they talk to us are when there's 7 of us sitting around a table, and that's a lot for some people. And I think it's important for us to be able to establish relationships and get to know some of those people, so that way they feel a little bit more comfortable, and they know what kinds of questions are going to be asked, and they can be prepared for what to expect. And I think that the bigger departments, police, fire, schools are different because they're bigger. They got lots of bless you. No, but what I'm saying is that I think it's important that we do take an initiative, because I think sometimes they don't know who to reach out to. They don't know how to reach out to us, and I found I get more traction when I reach out to them, and I feel I want to help facilitate that dialogue. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the capital budgeting, and I'm on the subcommittee in the finance committee for capital budgeting, and I share your frustration. Basically, there's a lot going on, and I basically took on the report itself, the capital improvement plan, asset management plan, however we want to refer to it, because it wasn't getting taken care of, and I wanted to try to figure out some sort of a mechanism to do that. And I think there needs to be some understanding and dialogue about how to manage it as a town. I don't think it's proper for me to be handling it. I don't want to handle it. If I leave the finance committee, there won't be someone handling it, and then we're back to square one. And I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be something that's handled, managed, and understood, and that it has sort of a third party taking care of it that is not an elected person. So I don't like that I'm doing it, but I also saw a gap that I wanted to try to fill to make sure that it wasn't just completely falling to the wayside. But I can only do so much. So that's all I just wanted to point that out.
I'm going to just echo what you're saying. I think that if there was a two-way dialogue, it would feel less ring-kissy. Like come genuflect. But and I'm being,
You have
of
never
course.
kissed my ring, and it's
No, I have never kissed your ring.
Have you met Joan?
I know.
I know, so for her to say ring kissy.
No, I'm being hyperbolic, but Ken said come before us. I'm being hyperbolic for a change.
I don't think he meant it like that. So.
Well, I'm saying, but that's exactly what Ben is saying, that if there were more of a two-way dialogue, hey, what are you guys
I
thinking
think the
about?
schools
That kind
and
of
the
thing.
FinCom
But I
have
think
had
the
a-
most important part is that I think we're all saying the same thing. We're all singing from the same sheet of music. We need a guidepost, a vision plan, a strategic plan, but that group has to be cross-sectional. It has to be not just elected boards, but the PTO and the HABA and the HISA and, the basketball and the blah, blah, and the blah, blah, and the Green Committee, and the sustainability.
Businesses.
All of that, and just regular taxpayers who generally show up and vote. But we have to do this sooner rather than later because we need those pipes. We need that water to,
We need a
Yeah.
high school.
Mark, you had.
maybe.
Yes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about communication, and I think Ben touched on it very well. And that's why I talked to Ken, the finance chair, about communication is a two-way street. And so we only have 3 members on our board. And you can imagine all the liaison work we have to do. My suggestion was to help out with communication is that the Finance Committee always has a member at our board meetings come, listen, raise their hand, be proactive, tell us if something sounds expensive when we're talking about it, talk to us at our
Always.
meetings.
Dan would never put his hand down.
It's an incremental.
And because when you look at the calendar every week, the select board meets Monday evenings. Tuesday evenings, the Finance Committee meets. If you have a representative at our meetings every week, which you did last fall, but it tailed off this year. But recently, members have been coming again, because I did ask. You'll have immediate information from the night before that you can share with the rest of the Finance Committee, right, as the liaison, because that's what you're supposed to do. Share information as the liaison with the rest of your committee. So if you come to our committees, meetings, and you see the whole host of things we talk about, and just take some notes on the specific things that pertain to finance, and bring it up at your meeting under public comment, if you will, if it's not on the agenda, so that you have a record of it. And then you may have some questions then that you can bring back to us next Monday as the liaison and say, our board wants to know about these items. It's not clear enough for us. So my message to the Finance Committee is that it works both ways. And you need to do a better job at that. And Ben definitely touched on that. Communication is a two-way street. And we're very busy people too, exceptionally busy. We have meetings during the day for this town as well, not just at night. And we have about 25 to 30 emails a day about all kinds of things that go on in this community that none of you have to worry about, that we have to make decisions constantly, not to mention the phone calls. And since I have an office right in town, guess where people come to visit me unannounced? At my office, okay? So communication is the most important thing that these three boards can do. But you should have a representative at our meetings, because it is the executive board meeting, right? And that's where a lot of things start. So you should be there, and we should try to come more, as Ann Louise pointed out, to your meetings. And if our liaison can't,
Just a few of them.
yeah, and if our liaison can't make it, then one of the others should try to make it, or at least Jeff, to gather information. So we need to do a better job too. But we do send our liaison just about every single Finance Committee meeting. A Board of Select is there. And we absolutely raise our hands, and we bring up information, and we ask questions. So I feel as though our board is trying to do a better job with that. But I would encourage everyone to do a better job at that. And I think that will really help, because it'll be weekly information that we're communicating. So the Finance Committee liaison comes up to our meeting and says, like Ken pointed out, we need more information about your town hall budget. This is what we need. The next day, I'll have Jeff send that to him, whatever they need, okay? Two-way street. It's very important. Thank you.
John?
Briefly, because I feel like we're reaching the
Yeah.
end game here. Just to tack on, I had great coffee with Ann Louise about a month ago. We talked about capital budgeting, and it was a great conversation. It was good. But one of the things that came out of it was sort of my expression, the need to invest in a chief financial officer for our town. A CFO/assistant town administrator, something we've talked about on our board. We're brewing up a job description, which I think would really help fill in a lot of the holes. Ben and I have had a conversation. I've had other conversations with members of the Finance Committee about this role. You're right, the capital improvement plan needs care and feeding. Elected volunteers can't do that sustainably. So I think it's a space that the select board, through this new role, can help fill and provide, outward-facing information to the units, the departments and agencies that need that information. So I see a solution down the road with that position, and I really think it would benefit everybody. So just wanted to add that.
Well, since the topic that we started with was communication in the budget process, I think we've exhausted that. But in the course of the conversation of now an hour and a half, there have been a number of issues that have been raised that need follow-up, obviously. And, I don't know if you want to continue or just think we've carried this far enough.
Should we summarize them? Because as
Yeah.
you just said, I used to be a project manager, so at the end of the meeting, there would be takeaways and then who gets to run with them.
Go ahead, Joan.
So,
Well, I think there's also going to be.
I'll make a list.
To reconvene, because I
Yeah.
suspect there's some we didn't get to.
Yeah, we were just focused on, the budget issues,
Yeah.
but there's so many other issues.
We should summarize, but is it worth having him go through the ones that were on the
Absolutely.
agenda, just to
Because-
see what we didn't cover off on?
the agenda is,
I
this
didn't
was
see
the
that.
agenda.
That was the only thing. that-
Right,
That-
well,
that is
sorry,
the
what else
agenda.
is on?
I
Oh,
mean,
you
the
look
next
like
one
you-
is scheduled
No,
next
this is the
meeting.
agenda, and Louise.
No,
It
I know,
says
I
nothing,
have
yeah.
it, but you look like you have
He has a
something
different
else.
No, I just typed it up differently, but it's the same agenda.
Oh.
Really?
Bigger font.
Nothing gets by.
Okay.
This is all we have on our
Summarizing
That's
agenda.
all this has.
Okay. It's just bigger, more.
Yeah, well, that's because I got
Fleshed
some more.
it out.
I thought I was introducing people.
I know.
so-
Do you want to highlight the things you think we didn't
Yeah,
get to
do
in
we-
our
do we not?
amorphous conversation?
No, I mean, I think there are other issues, but it's really the boards that need to identify what those issues are to come back with another meeting. I'm just a last-minute moderator here, but, I mean, I think the idea of, I mean, fortunately, this has been taped, so there's a chance to go through and spend more time visualizing what was actually said and what were the issues to be able to, do the piece about, what are those issues. Unless you all think that you can spend another few minutes to identify that now. But maybe that's,
Go for it, Joan.
I'll be the secretary.
So Sam, I also think too, some of the issue is, and happens in everyday life, is in terms of communication, there is, people misinterpret the intent of what was said. And that's sort of what was bringing me to Ben's point about, there were things that Ken was saying, like, I'm always available, you can always reach me, and that was like a come to me, right? I think all of us need to be more cognizant of what we say about the budget, about things. So we talk about there's a finite pie, we talk about we only have so much money, but we don't ever consider our town employees and what they might be hearing when they hear us say that all the time. When we talk about collective bargaining and we say there's only a 1% guideline, that's all we have money for. I think that's some of the issue too, is we need to be really cognizant of what we're saying, what our intent is, and how other people are actually taking that. That has been the heart of some of the frustration or miscommunication or whatever you want to call it.
our request exorbitant.
But that's that,
Yes,
like
exactly.
Or
That's what Lisa's
call it a
saying.
gorilla.
that's,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, no, Dana, and I'm saying, I'm using that as an example. We're all guilty of making some comment that's either, right, hyperbolic or not.
Or
Gina?
opinion.
Joan.
Because we can't fund it.
I was gonna just propose that we schedule a next meeting, but not to steal Joan's thunder here, that perhaps each chair propose 3 items for that agenda, rather than read a
Right,
list
I
of
think that's
items
good.
tonight that might open up debate for, no,
Yep.
that should or shouldn't be, or that was or wasn't. Perhaps if each board or committee makes a commitment to add to that agenda, so schedule the next date, and then have a timeline in which we submit our agenda items. And then the boards can come back and reflect within their own group and sort of say, this is what I really want to see. I mean, I have a feeling strategic plan's going to be right up there, but that's me rejecting, probably shouldn't have done that. So I would say let's schedule next date.
That's a good plan. Who's taking the minutes for this meeting?
I am.
Is that you or Jeff? I thought it might be you. I wasn't sure. Will that be something the collective group has an opportunity to just review? Is that so? Okay, thank you.
I know you have the notes, but I would also suggest reviewing the recording, so that you have a second chance at looking at what was, or hearing what was said, and maybe complement what you have written down.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so with that,
Town meeting is on May 4th, which gives us essentially 2 months before town meeting. So I think the question is to meet before or to meet after.
Well, may I ask a minor question, because timing is relevant to when we plan this meeting? My understanding was there was some question around whether or not the select board would review our statement of interest request again.
It's on the agenda Monday.
It is on the agenda for Monday. Okay. I didn't know if it was pending another meeting of this. Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
okay, nothing further being said. Waiting for the notes from the meeting from the town administrator, and then scheduling another meeting, and Tina's idea of the chairs of each of the 3 boards, identifying a couple issues that could be part of the discussion.
Perfect.
I think the meeting should be before town.
I'd throw it
Yes.
early.
Yeah, I do too.
I'd throw it a month from now.
But before the warrant is printed or finalized?
That should be
or-
before the warrant is printed.
Well,
or finalized.
maybe what we do,
First week of April.
at the risk of suggesting this,
Yep.
Moodle,
If that's absolutely.
Sorry.
put a few dates into Moodle and see how many people can get there, like, because you have a lot of.
Tag, you're it.
As long as it's decided and comes out more than 48 hours before the meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well.
Next time.
I mean, if somebody wants to propose like 3 or 4 dates, and then I'll put that in the Moodle, or I can look at the town calendar and see where there's nothing.
Okay.
Wow, how did that end up in my lap? I feel that should be yours. What?
That sounds great.
So I do feel like we talked about a lot of things, but we don't have an action plan. I feel like we were.
step, Joe.
Well, I think,
Well,
maybe
well,
the
I mean,
next
but I want
meeting.
us to be effective and to make this not just a, let's air our grievances or share our thoughts or
Well,
brainstorm.
I think that we can talk about it offline at our individual boards, right? Like tomorrow, we can talk about what we'd like to put for our 3 things. Have some time to marinate and then talk about our 3 things. Maybe?
So
I mean,
let's
that's just my
marinate that
2
strategic
cents.
plan. I don't
Let's
know
marinate
what's
it.
gonna happen if we marinate about it, you know what I mean?
But you're looking for a sort of a summary of what came out of this meeting?
Right,
Yeah, well,
and action items.
Well, the one action item that could really happen now is starting to put together a group of folks who
Vision.
could do this
Right.
vision process. I mean,
Yes.
that could happen tomorrow.
Thank you,
Yes.
that's what I was trying to say.
What did you say?
Today was
pretty much what I
Festivus.
just
Look
said.
at it. The airing
Rest
of
of us.
grievances. That's right. Tomorrow will be the Feast of Strength.
Who is driving the creation of this? I mean, I would think that the select board would do that, but I just simply because they create many committees and things for town, but just.
Well, I think we work
Committee
with the 3
creators.
boards and we find a good
Well, to be
date,
clear,
and we set-
a member of the finance committee more likely cannot be officially on that.
As long as if it's a committee.
No, someone should,
But
from
if
the
it's a
finance
committee-
committee should
We
be on
need to
it.
be clear how we're
If it's a
setting,
committee, we can't.
so
Can't be.
by the town bylaw, which used to be,
Any other committee.
just like we couldn't be on the school, the tuition free
We can
full
only,
day.
we could be on a
kindergarten,
working group, but we can't be.
Yeah,
on a
working
All right, let's
group.
call it a working group.
Yeah.
We'll call it a working group for the strategic plan.
Perfect.
Vision.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's a good decision right there.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what needs to be done to create it, but I guess the select
Yeah.
board
Who
can do
creates
that.
working groups?
So what you're saying, the clerk
Exactly.
is gonna take it up?
Vision.
No, I'm
Excellent.
pointing to the town, yeah, I will, but I believe it's the town administrator duty, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me, John or Jeff, if I am mistaken. You look like the Cheshire Cat over there.
What's that?
What?
Huh?
What do I do?
Were you talking about me?
He's like, okay, how many days till retirement? How many days till town
Jeff,
meeting?
is it appropriate to ask that you suggest names for a working group, for a vision planning process.
Sure, I can do that.
There you go. Would you be?
Names of people or?
Well,
sort
or
of-
a process.
Process too,
I don't know about, well, okay.
for people to be.
Well, 2 school committee members, 2 FinCom,
Sure,
like
sure,
that
yeah.
sort of thing. He doesn't have
And
to
then
say.
there's
state.
specific
No,
people.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yes,
was thinking, I was like, what?
Members
And
of
then
the
different,
business,
different interest
business
groups in town,
community.
Right,
Invite,
right.
you know, we invite
Yeah.
who gets
Right.
to come.
And we have to be, you know, like Liz Greendale has to swear them in and all.
Which is
Official.
Not a
separate.
working group.
No, not a working
working
group.
group we
No,
do.
working group,
Okay.
no.
Which is a separate.
Just
committee
put Mary
from this.
Greendale's name down now.
Yeah, Mary Greendale's here, so we'll stick her on there.
So, all right, so Anne Louise, if you're gonna do the doodle.
No, what I'm gonna do, because I do not want to overcommit between now and next Thursday. I'm like a literal crazy lady, so, because I forgot we have negotiations this weekend, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm gonna do is send a link to Moodle. Moodle to Jeff's in case you haven't used it before, and I'll tell you what it is. And then you pick 3 dates that you think could work based on the town calendar, and you send a Moodle invite to everybody, and then everybody, if you don't know what Moodle is, it's like a big thing that goes in, and you start and you indicate which dates work for you, and you can see what other people are picking, and it selects the date. So, does that work? Okay.
And I think, Sam, having you here was what we need. And so I suggest we continue with a moderator, whether it's Sam or
Bill.
But I think,
But he's
Still there.
yes.
He's been here. I think we should.
Yeah,
keep
I
with
agree.
him.
I think that that's
Now
helpful.
that you've got time, you know.
No.
He's
I
retired now.
think I think that you were incredibly helpful,
Made pro bono
so
job.
We'll bring cookies next time.
thank you for,
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
thank you for
Yes,
agreeing
thank
to be
you,
with us. We
Sam.
appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Consider it's last minute. You're welcome.
So do we need to take individual motions for our boards to adjourn?
Yes.
Yes. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn. And moved by Dawn, seconded by Anne Louise, all in favor? Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
It is 8:45, and thanks for listening in. Good night.
Night.
Good night.